The sun was a hammer on my skull, each beat echoing the throbbing agony in my lower body. Spring of 1881 Arizona Territory. The land around Copper Ridge was a parched, unforgiving canvas painted in shades of dust and despair. The wind, when it came, offered no solace, only a rasping whisper of grit and heat against my blistered skin. I lay there near a narrow ravine at the base of a slope where the ground told a violent tale. Blackened, blood-shattered weapons, a torn strip of military blue, empty canteens, the tracks of horses and boots erratic, and fast spoke of a desperate fight just days ago. And in the middle of it all, Alara lay still. I had once moved with the grace of a hawk, a spear, an extension of my arm, my back straight, my spirit unyielding. A warrior by the standards of my people, respected, sharp, and capable. I had stood beside men, not behind them. I knew how to ride, how to strike clean, how to move unseen as a shadow. But all that had ended 3 days ago. A blast of cannon fired too close had torn the lower halves of both my legs open like raw meat. The world had exploded. And when the ringing in my ears subsided, so too had my life as I knew it. They couldn't carry me. There was no travois, and the soldiers were pressing in from the west, their distant shouts like the baying of hounds. My own brother Kyle, his hands shaking, tears streaming down his dust-streaked cheeks, had made the cut. The memory was a fresh wound in my mind, sharper than any blade. He used a heated knife, the smell of burnt flesh mingling with the coppery tang of my own blood. He bundled the stumps as best he could, his face a mask of agony. No time to talk, no time to explain. Just one last desperate look between us. A silent farewell that tore at my soul. Then he turned, his shoulders slumped, and followed the others into the hills, leaving me behind. They left me a skin of water and some rawhide straps. That was it. For a while, in the haze of pain and fever, I thought they were right to leave me. The pain was unbearable, a searing fire that consumed me from the waist down. The fever came and went, dragging me into a swirling abyss of delirium. On the first night, I passed out, mercifully escaping the torment. On the second, I woke to the horrifying sensation of ants crawling across my belly, their tiny legs 1,000 pinpricks on my skin. My arms, weak and trembling, shook too much to swat them away. By the third day, my skin had blistered from the relentless sun. The buckskin dress I wore, once strong and tight, had been shredded in the blast, slipping open at the chest, exposing skin that baked under the indifferent sky. I didn't scream. Screaming didn't help. It only wasted the precious air that barely filled my lungs. I lay there waiting. For death, for release, for anything to end the torment. I was a broken vessel, cast aside, a warrior without legs, without a tribe, without hope. Then a shadow fell over me. A tall, lean shadow. I didn't move. My eyes were barely slits against the glare, but I saw him. Jedediah Stone. He was 36, born in Missouri, raised hard. He'd soldiered young, fought for the South in a war he didn't believe in. Afterward, he'd tried mining, cattle work, even bounty riding, but nothing stuck. In the end, he'd bought a small stretch of land in the Arizona Territory with the last of his pay and kept to himself. He didn't talk much, didn't drink either. Folks in Copper Ridge thought he might have gone half mad after the fire that killed his wife 3 years back. Some said they'd seen him stand for hours at the edge of his field, just staring at nothing. Today, he was following a trail of 3 stray heifers that had broken off from his herd. Their tracks cut north across dry flats and into the edge of the ravine. He rode slow, a rifle slung across his back, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over pale blue eyes. His horse, a lean, dusty gelding named Brisk, stopped suddenly near the edge of the gulch ears, pricked, breathing slow. Jed narrowed his eyes, scanning the shadows between brush and stone. Then he heard it. Not an animal sound, but a rasp almost human. He dismounted, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver, and walked carefully toward the slope. His boots scuffed the dirt. Heat shimmered off the rock. Then he saw me. He froze. At first glance, he must have figured I was dead. My body was twisted, half covered in dust and grit. My arms splayed outward like I'd fallen from a height. The stench of dried blood and sweat hit him sharp, a grim testament to my suffering. But then my chest moved barely. A shallow rise, then fall. Jed stepped closer, crouched down, squinting at my face. Apache. My dress had once been stitched with bone and hide, now torn open across my front. He didn't look long. My lips were cracked, my eyes half closed, but I saw the flicker of something in his pale eyes. Not pity, not fear, but a quiet recognition of raw suffering. He could see the bindings at my thighs, thick, discolored, soaked through in places. The wounds looked bad, but not rotting. Not yet. He took a step back, thought hard. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. If he left now, I might last another hour, maybe two. Taking me might mean trouble. Risk time. A sick Apache woman on his land would be a death sentence if the wrong people found out. But I was breathing. He exhaled a slow, deliberate sound, took off his hat, looked around once, then stepped forward. He bent down and slipped his arms under my back and beneath my knees, or where they should have been. My body flinched when he touched me, a jolt of pain and surprise. My eyes opened a little wider. I saw him. My gaze didn't beg, didn't plead. It just held like someone waiting for judgment. He didn't say anything, just stood, adjusted my weight against his chest, and turned back toward his horse. I groaned once the sound horse broken, but he didn't pause. He carried me, a burden both physical and moral, away from the place of my abandonment. Back at the ranch, the wind had picked up swirling dust across the ground as Jed rode in with me, cradled in one arm. The house sat alone, a one-room cabin built from split pine, patched in places with iron sheeting. The barn leaned like it was tired of holding itself up. He carried me straight through the door and into the house, placing me down gently on his cot, a narrow frame with a thin wool blanket and one worn pillow. I didn't speak. My face was tight with pain, but my eyes moved, tracking the room, studying the walls, the weapons, the shelves. Jed went to work, fetched clean water from the barrel, set a cloth to boil, took a sawed-off stool, and used it as a place to set my legs. The dress had to come up carefully without looking more than he had to. He peeled back the cloth from my thighs. My body tensed, a primal instinct to protect myself, but I didn't stop him. The stumps were angry, red, swollen, split at the edges. He cleaned them with water and pine sap, packed what he could with pus, and rewrapped them in clean strips he tore from an old bedsheet. His hands were calloused, rough from hard labor, but his movements were slow, precise, surprisingly gentle. I didn't cry once. The pain was immense, but I had learned long ago that tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. When the sun went down, he lit a lamp. I was asleep by then, or perhaps just passed out from exhaustion and pain. He sat across the room at the edge of the table, arms folded, watching my chest rise and fall. I was a stranger, an enemy in the eyes of his people, yet he watched over me. I woke before dawn. The light barely touched the inside of the cabin, painting the rough-hewn walls in shades of gray. I stared at the ceiling, my breath slow, shallow. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and touched the edge of my leg. Nothing. Still gone. My throat tightened, a wave of despair threatening to drown me. For a long time I didn't move. Just lay there, the crushing weight of my new reality pressing down on me. Then I heard it, boots outside. Not rush, just steady steps across the dirt. He came in with a tin bowl, set it beside me on the crate that served as a nightstand. Bread soaked in broth. I didn't reach for it, just looked at him. His eyes didn't flinch. He didn't ask my name, didn't explain why I was there. He just nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, then turned back outside. That's when I said it. Silent man. My voice rasped dry, cracking from disuse, but I meant it. He paused at the door, didn't turn around, then walked out. We didn't know it yet, but neither of us would be alone again. The wind came up strong that morning, shaking the shutters on the cabin and stirring dust across the porch. Inside, the light shifted across the wooden floor as the sun rose. I hadn't touched the food. The tin bowl sat cold by the time Jed returned near mid-morning, his arms full with chopped kindling. His boots made a low thud across the floorboards as he entered. But I didn't flinch this time. I was sitting up against the wall now, propped awkwardly with my arms. My legs, what remained, were covered by a folded blanket. My eyes tracked him the entire way, sharp, clearer than the night before, but I didn't speak. He didn't either. He set the kindling beside the stove, lit the fire, and moved to the water barrel without saying a word. When he passed me, I noticed my fingers twitch. I was trying to shift myself upright, a desperate need for independence stirring within me. My arm slipped a little and I winced, grabbing at my side, the effort sending a fresh wave of pain through my abdomen. He paused, crouched beside me. "You'll rip your stitches." His voice was low, almost rough from disuse, but it held a surprising gentleness. I stared at him, my lips parted. That was the first full sentence he'd said since finding me. He held my gaze a second longer, then reached an arm behind my back and helped me sit straighter. I was strong, or trying to be. The heat in my eyes hadn't gone out. He saw it now, clearer in daylight. Not just pain, but a kind of cold fury under the surface. Not at him, but at everything that had happened, at the world that had tried to break me. Jed pulled over an old chair, one he'd cut the legs down a year back after a hip injury made sitting difficult. He put it beside the bed. "Try this," he muttered. I didn't move, my pride warring with my desperate need. He pointed again, firm this time. "You slide forward. Arms here. All steady." I didn't answer, but I moved with effort, using my arms and what little muscle I had left in my core. I shifted toward the edge of the cot. My breathing picked up ragged with strain. I gritted my teeth as I eased my weight onto the chair. Jed held my upper back steady but without pressing. When I was in place, he let go. I sat for a minute without speaking, adjusting my balance. The back of the chair wasn't padded, digging into my spine. My palms rested on the edge of my thighs, or where they used to be. I looked around the cabin, truly seeing it for the first time. A rifle by the door, a pair of boots turned inward. A coat hung on a peg. A long crack ran through the wall above the stove. The place was quiet, worn, and lived in. "You live here alone?" I asked, my voice low, raw, but firming. He nodded. I studied him. His face was rough from days without shaving. His shirt was stained to the collar. A thin white scar ran from his jaw to under his left ear. When he walked, I noticed his right leg dragged slightly. I looked down at my own. "You could have left me." "I didn't," he said, simply, his gaze unwavering. A silence hung after that, but it wasn't hostile. It settled slow and heavy like dust, a comfortable quiet that spoke volumes. Jed went to the table, scooped some food from a pot, and brought it to me in a fresh tin bowl. This time I took it, ate slow, with shaking fingers, the warmth of the broth a welcome comfort. He didn't stare, didn't sit close, just stayed nearby, working the stove cleaning tools, adjusting the boards along the west window that always whistled in the wind. Later that afternoon, a fierce determination seized me. I tried to crawl across the floor. Jed had gone to the shed to fetch nails. When he came back in, I was halfway between the cot and the water barrel, dragging myself forward with both arms, my face soaked in sweat. The blanket had fallen away, my bare skin pressed against the wood floor, the cloth under my hips torn and dirty. He stopped watching me. I looked up, breathing hard. "I'm not going to rot in that bed," I muttered, my voice filled with a defiant fire. He didn't argue. Instead, he crossed the room, crouched down, and lifted me up under the arms. Not rough, not slow, just steady. I tensed when his hands brushed my ribs, but I didn't pull away. He placed me gently back on the cot. Then he walked outside again, silent. That night, he built me something. In the barn, under the hanging oil lamp, I heard the rhythmic sounds of sawing and hammering. He took apart an old chair and used the frame to shape a rolling platform, flat low, with small side rails and cloth padding on the base. A seat I could use with my hands. The wheels were salvaged from a broken cart. He tested its strength by pressing down on it with his own weight. By morning, he brought it inside. I stared at it, unmoving, my heart a strange mix of gratitude and stubborn pride. A second passed, then two. I didn't smile, not quite, but something in my face shifted. My fingers reached out and touched the edge. "You made this." He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "I don't beg," I said quietly, almost like a warning, a declaration of my unbroken spirit. "You didn't," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. That day we found a rhythm. He'd lift me into the seat, set my hands on the rails. I'd pull myself forward slowly at first, then stronger. He'd show me how to pivot near the table, how to brace against the doorframe. I cursed under my breath more than once, the frustration of my new limitations boiling over. But I didn't give up. I didn't ask his name until that night. He was lighting the lamp, about to step out. "You got a name, silent man?" He paused, one hand on the door. "Jed," he said without looking back. I repeated it once under my breath. "Jed." He left me with the lamp burning, and I sat there in the chair. He made my bare shoulders reflecting the soft light, my chest rising slow and even. I looked down at my lap, then at the bare tooth necklace around my throat. Cale had carved it. I didn't know if he'd made it out. I didn't blame him for leaving, not truly, but I hadn't forgiven him either. I touched the scar across my upper thigh, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Alive in a stranger's house. No legs, no kin, no clear future. But for the first time since the blast, I didn't feel like dying. And the man who saved me hadn't asked for anything. Not thanks, not stories, not names. I leaned my head back against the wall, staring at the ceiling, and whispered once, soft, barely audible. "Jed." He was the only reason I was still breathing. The days that followed settled into a routine, slow, hard, and quiet. Each morning, Jed rose before sunup. He kept to his habits, tending the horses, splitting wood, hauling water. His limp slowed him, but not by much. The cattle that roamed the far end of the valley had to be checked, and he did it without complaint. He never spoke much and never asked for help. He worked alone. Always had. Inside, I taught myself how to move again. The rolling platform Jed had built for me scraped lightly over the wooden floor as I dragged myself room to room. My palms developed small blisters by the second day. I ignored them, pushing through the pain. When I reached the stove, I tried to lift the kettle, dropped it once, swearing under my breath in my native tongue. The pain in my abdomen from the strain made me stop for the rest of the day. But I didn't stay still for long. By the end of the week, I could reach the table by myself, grip the side with both hands, and pull myself upright in the seat. Jed had added small blocks on the underside, so it didn't shift too much when I pushed. I never thanked him aloud, but he noticed I stopped calling him Silent Man. I just said his name when needed. Soft, direct. Jed, wait. One evening after dinner, I asked my first real question, the curiosity about this quiet man finally overcoming my reticence. You fought. My voice was stronger now, though still hoarse from disuse. Jed didn't answer right away. He was whittling near the fireplace, a piece of cedar in his hands, the blade glinting in the lamplight. Yeah, he said finally. Confederate Missouri Battalion. I looked at him long and hard, the irony of the situation not lost on me. And now you help me. He didn't look up. War is done. That was the end of it for him. But not for me. I sat quiet that night, staring into the flames, wondering how a man who once fought people like me could kneel beside my cot and clean my wounds without flinching. I thought maybe he'd lost someone. Maybe that's what changed a man. I didn't ask. Not yet. 2 days later, I caught a fever. It started with sweat. Then came the shivering, violent tremors that racked my body. By nightfall, my lips were dry and cracked, my skin hot to the touch, burning from the inside out. Jed checked my forehead, once his touch cool against my inflamed skin, then got to work. He brought water in small cloths, wiping my chest and face, trying to cool the fire within me. He boiled willow bark in a pan and forced it into my mouth when I refused, my throat too constricted to swallow. I spit once, the bitter liquid burning my tongue. He tried again, patiently, relentlessly. When the fever peaked, I groaned in my sleep, clawing at the blanket, my mind lost in a swirling nightmare of fire and loss. Jed sat beside me and pressed my shoulders down, firm but gentle, keeping me from tearing at my bandages. My fingers dug into his arm, my grip surprisingly strong, even in my delirium. He didn't pull away. That night I whispered names in Apache, some broken, some clear. Jed didn't know the words, but one came often: Kale. He guessed it was my brother. He was right. I broke the fever the next morning, my eyes heavy but clear. Jed had barely slept, his face etched with fatigue. You stayed? I asked, my voice ragged, filled with a fragile hope. He nodded, his gaze steady. You're still here. It wasn't much, but it mattered. He didn't run. Even when I screamed, even when I burned, he stayed. The next few days moved slow again, a gentle re-entry into the world of the living. My strength returned little by little. I began asking more about the land, the house, the animals. He answered in pieces, his words sparse but informative. Jed had built the place himself 5 years ago. Got the land cheap after the war, no neighbors. The closest town was Copper Ridge, a half-day's ride. He didn't go often, didn't like people. I asked where his wife was. He didn't answer, his silence a heavy cloak. I didn't press him, but I watched him. The way he paused sometimes near the window, his eyes lingering on the old coat hanging by the door. A woman's coat, warm but cleaned, carefully preserved. I didn't say anything. Later, when he was outside, I pulled myself to the far corner of the room. There was a small trunk under the bed. I didn't open it, just stared at it, then went back to my spot. I respected his silence. He respected my scars. That was the unspoken agreement between us, a fragile bridge built on mutual understanding. One afternoon, I pulled the dress tighter around my chest. It had torn more over the days from the dragging the movement. My shoulders were bare again, and the thin fabric across my breasts hung loose. I glanced toward him. He was chopping onions at the table, his back to me. He saw, looked, then looked away, his movements unwavering. Doesn't bother you? I asked, challenging him, my voice laced with a raw vulnerability. He set the knife down, looked at me again. His eyes didn't change, no judgment, no discomfort. You're a woman, I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. A broken one. No, he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. Just that. And then he went back to chopping. His simple words struck me with a force I hadn't anticipated. He saw me, not my brokenness, but simply me. That night, something changed. I didn't pull the blanket so high. I didn't turn away when he lifted me into the cot. I looked at him full on, truly seeing him for the first time. I saw the strong line of his jaw, the stubble on his neck, the wear in his eyes, the quiet strength that radiated from him. You ain't scared of me, I said, half statement, half test. No, he replied, his voice a low rumble. Why? I pressed, needing to understand. He looked at me steady, his pale eyes holding mine. Because you're alive. I let out a slow breath, a heavy weight lifting from my chest, and nodded. That was the first time I smiled. Not wide, not long, but real, a genuine curve of my lips that felt foreign after so long. Outside, a wind picked up again, brushing dust across the cabin walls. Inside, we didn't speak anymore that night. I lay in bed. He sat near the stove. The fire crackled low, and our silence filled the space like something solid, something earned. No one else knew where I was. No one else had come, and neither of us planned on going anywhere. Spring deepened. Days stretched longer, and the air turned warmer, filled with dust and the dry smell of mesquite. The land outside the cabin stayed quiet. No riders, no travelers, just whine through the brush and the occasional cry of a hawk circling high above. Inside, the rhythm between us held. Each morning, Jed brought in water, kept the fire low, cooked in silence. I pulled myself into my rolling seat by dawn, careful now. My hands more practiced, my movements controlled. My strength was coming back. I didn't wince when I lifted myself anymore. The blisters had turned to calluses, tough and resilient like my spirit. I wore one of Jed's old shirts, now wide-buttoned at the front, cinched tight with a belt I'd fashioned myself. My buckskin dress had torn too far to be patched. He'd left the shirt folded on the foot of my cot 3 mornings ago. Didn't say a word, just set it there. I'd watched him go out, then reached for it and changed without hesitation. It felt like a uniform, a new skin for a new life. That morning I asked what he did before all this. Drove cattle, a little mining. Odd jobs, Jed said. He was repairing a saddle near the barn door, seated on a stump, his movements efficient. Nothing I stuck with long. What happened to your wife? I asked, calm but direct, the question I had held back for so long finally escaping my lips. He paused mid-stitch. His hands stayed still, frozen in midair. Fire, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Yet I felt the tremor beneath the surface. 3 winters ago. Stove tipped while I was out fixing the fence. I got back too late. He didn't lift his eyes. Didn't say more. I sat quiet for a while after that. I didn't ask more. The silence that followed didn't feel cold. It felt like something understood, a shared burden of loss. Later that day, Jed brought in a second chair and placed it beside mine at the table. You going to sit with me now? I asked, my eyebrow raised in surprise. He gave the faintest nod. Seemed right. We ate together for the first time that night without the table between us. The lamp sat in the middle, casting soft shadows across the room. I moved slower than usual, chewing with purpose, my eyes flicking to him now and then, studying his profile in the flickering light. You always this quiet? I asked, a hint of a playful challenge in my voice. He shrugged. Talk when I need to, I guess. I talk enough for both. He looked at me then, just for a second, and a smile, faint and fleeting, touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't much, but it was the first I'd seen, and it warmed something deep inside me. After supper, I asked him to bring me outside. He hesitated. Don't want folks seeing, he said, his voice low. There's no one out there, I replied, my gaze firm. And I need the wind. He picked me up gently, his arms strong and steady beneath me, carried me out onto the porch and set me down on a wide bench he'd padded with blankets. The sky above was streaked with orange and purple, the last light of the day bleeding across the hills. I closed my eyes, breathing slow, inhaling the scent of dust and freedom. Smells like fire's not far, I murmured. He glanced toward the horizon. Someone's burning brush. Early clearing. I didn't ask to go back inside. I stayed still, eyes closed, face to the sky, feeling the last warmth of the day on my skin. Jed sat beside me, his hat resting in his lap. I shifted after a while, my shoulder brushing his arm. Not accidental. You ever touch a woman like this? I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't move. Like what? Not out of duty. Not out of pity. Just touch. I turned my head slowly, my eyes searching his. He didn't flinch. My shirt hung open slightly where it didn't quite button high enough. My collarbones were bare, the line of my chest soft, steady. I'm not broken, I said, my voice gaining strength. Don't look at me like I'm a ghost. I don't. He answered, his voice a low rumble. My hand slid across the bench and found his. I placed his palm low against my hip, the curve of what remained. Flesh warm, scarred but smooth. His fingers twitched but didn't pull back. I held him there. I can't feel it like before, I said, my voice raw with honesty, but I still want it. His breath deepened. I leaned toward him slow, let my lips brush his cheek, then lower, until my mouth found his. I kissed him soft, not demanding, not fast, but like. I meant it. A silent promise. He kissed me back, a hesitant then firm response. When we broke apart, I looked at him, my expression calm, unafraid. You sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I know what I want, I said, my gaze unwavering. He lifted me again, careful, his arms strong beneath me. brought me inside without a word, laid me gently on the cot, his hands steady. I unfastened my belt and let the shirt fall open. My body was thin-curved, bruised in places, a testament to my ordeal, but my eyes stayed locked on him. He undressed without shame, his movements deliberate. His chest was scarred ribs visible beneath weathered skin. I didn't flinch, reached out and touched the old bullet scar on his hip. "You ain't the only one with ghosts," I said, my voice soft. That night we lay together slow, not out of need but understanding. I pressed my mouth to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. He kissed the scar on my thigh, a tender gesture that brought tears to my eyes. When he moved over me, it wasn't fast. It wasn't hungry. It was deliberate, careful, real. And when we finished, he didn't move away. He stayed. I lay curled against him, my breath warm on his skin. My hand rested on his chest, my fingers tracing the faint lines of his muscles. "You could have left me," I whispered again, the old wound still aching. He closed his eyes, but his voice was firm. But I didn't. In the dark, we held each other like neither of us had in years. Not since before the war, before the fire, before the bleeding. Outside, the wind died down. Inside, we didn't say another word. We didn't need to. We'd said enough. Jed woke first. He always did. Light hadn't yet touched the edges of the cabin, but the faint sound of the wind pressing against the window told me morning wasn't far. I lay against his chest, my hand curled loosely near his ribs, my breath even slow. He didn't move for a while, just watched the ceiling and listened to the quiet. When he finally shifted, it was careful, easing out from beneath me, pulling the blanket up to my bare shoulders. I didn't stir, pretending to be asleep, wanting to savor the warmth of his presence. He dressed in the dark quietly. Shirt, trousers, boots. He poured a little water into the basin and splashed his face. There was a tightness in his chest he didn't quite understand, but it wasn't bad. Just full different. He glanced back once before stepping outside. The air was cold. Frost still clung to the edges of the trough. He walked to the barn, fed the horses, checked the fences. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the way my hand had moved over his chest in the night. Not out of need, just to stay connected. Inside, I stirred an hour later. I pulled the blanket up over my chest, my eyes scanning the room. It felt different. Not just warmer, but steadier, as if the very air had settled into a new comfortable pattern. I shifted upright in the cot, reached for the shirt Jed had left on the footboard, and dressed slow. My body still ached. Phantom pains in the legs that weren't there, a cruel reminder, but my hands worked fast, efficient. I slid into my rolling seat, braced against the edge of the table, and started boiling water for coffee. When Jed came back and the place smelled of coffee and warm cloth, he nodded once, a silent greeting. I didn't say anything at first, just handed him a cup. "How's the hip?" I asked, my voice soft. He sat down, same as always, still limping. He gave a one-shoulder shrug, still walking. I reached for a slice of bread, tore it in half, and passed him a piece. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like habit, a shared understanding that transcended words. But there were things neither of us had said. Not last night, not before, and we were both thinking it now. "Why didn't you shoot me?" I asked, suddenly my voice cutting through the quiet. Jed looked up, caught off guard, his pale eyes widening slightly. My eyes didn't waver. "When you found me," I clarified. "Lying there. I was Apache, bleeding, half dead. You fought men like me." "I didn't fight women," he said, his voice low. "That ain't an answer," I countered, my gaze unwavering. He took a breath, glanced toward the window. The sky was pale blue, now cloudless. I saw a person hurt, left behind. "That's it," I studied him, searching for any hint of deceit. "You didn't hesitate. I've been left behind, too." I let that sit between us, a long moment, the weight of my past hanging in the air. Then I said softer, my voice tinged with a fragile sadness. "Kyle didn't mean to go. He was scared. They all were." "Kale, your brother Jed?" asked, his voice gentle. I nodded. "He cut my legs off. Wrapped them. Told me he'd come back. I think he believed it. But no one did." Jed leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze compassionate. "You think he's still alive?" "I don't know," I whispered. The uncertainty, a dull ache in my chest. "I want to hate him, but I can't." He was crying. There was something in my voice, a raw vulnerability that Jed understood. Deep down, that mixture of anger and love that never sorted clean. He reached across the table, took my hand, slow and steady. I didn't pull back. His touch was comforting, a silent promise of presence. That afternoon, Jed began building a ramp down the back porch. I watched from the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest, a blanket draped across my lap. "You expect me to run laps around the yard now?" I asked, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. "I expect you'll want the choice," he replied, his voice gruff but kind. I smiled not wide, but the corner of my mouth twitched. Smart man. He worked with focus, hammering thick boards into place, adding grips along the rail. By sundown, it held solid. I tried it the next morning. My arms strained at first, pushing me forward, backward, testing the slope. The wheels creaked. I moved slow, but I moved. I made it to the chicken coop by midday, sat there in the sun, tossing cracked corn onto the dirt, feeling the warmth on my face, the wind in my hair. Jed watched me from the side of the barn. I looked peaceful, still scarred, still healing, but alive in a way I hadn't been when he first carried me in. That night after we ate, I asked to bathe. I need help, I said plainly, my voice devoid of shame. I ain't got the reach. He nodded, didn't ask questions. He carried me to the wooden tub outside the barn, already filled with warm water. He set me down easy, his hands steady. I didn't cover myself, didn't turn away. You look like you're waiting to be told it's all right, I said, my eyes watching him, testing the boundaries of our unspoken bond. I'm waiting to see if you want me to, he replied, his voice soft. I reached up, took his hand, and brought it to my waist. You're not just saving me anymore, I said quietly. You're with me. He helped me wash slowly, gently, his hands over my back, down my arms, across the curve of my hip, and the smooth skin that led to the edge of the scarred thigh. I leaned against him when he rinsed water dripping down both our arms, a shared intimacy. When he carried me back to the cabin wrapped in a wool blanket, I pressed my mouth against his shoulder just once, a silent thank you. Inside, I dressed myself with no help. Later, I pulled myself up into his lap near the fire and didn't say anything for a long time. Just rested my head against his chest, my hand over his heart, listening to the steady beat. Jed didn't move. He just sat there holding me, listening to the sound of the wind against the glass, and my breathing slow and steady, alive. No one had asked him to stay before. No one ever stayed for me, but we were both still here, and that mattered more than anything. By early June, the land around Jed's cabin baked under dry skies. Days were longer, nights held warmth, and the brush fire scent that used to drift in from the ridge had faded. What remained now was dust wind and the sound of birds settling in the rafters above the barn each evening. I had learned every inch of the cabin by feel. I could reach the stove, the table, the front door. The ramp Jed built out back held firm. I used it each morning now, rolling myself out to sit in the sun, my elbows strong, my legs covered in the thick woven blanket. I'd stitched myself from torn cloth and hide. It wasn't beautiful, but it worked. I had stopped asking what came next, and Jed had stopped waiting for me to leave. Our days moved slow, meals, shared repairs, made wood split. But something deeper ran between us now, in the silences, in the way he'd reach over to adjust the edge of my shirt when it slipped, in the way I'd brush dust off his shoulder as he passed. We didn't speak about it. We didn't have to. That morning, as Jed was finishing repairs on the back gate, he heard my voice carry across the yard, sharp and clear. There's someone coming. He straightened, wiped sweat from his brow, looked up. I was perched under the overhang near the chicken coop, my eyes fixed toward the east trail. A dark speck moved along the ridge. A rider, slow, solitary. Jed didn't hesitate. He set the hammer down, wiped his hands, and stepped inside to grab his rifle. You expecting trouble? I asked, rolling into the doorway, my hand resting near the knife Jed had left for me under the blanket 2 weeks back, just in case. Don't know yet, he muttered, his face grim. I didn't ask more. I wheeled myself out of view behind the porch wall, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. The rider came closer, a mule, not a horse. The man atop was thin, dust-covered, with a long coat and a hat low over his eyes. He raised one hand in a lazy wave as he neared the gate. Friendly, I asked from behind the wall. Don't smell like cavalry, Jed muttered, stepping out into the open, rifle low. The man dismounted slow, tied the mule to a post. You Jedediah Holt, he asked, his voice raspy. Jed didn't answer, just watched him, his eyes narrowed. The man reached into his coat, slow, careful, and pulled out a folded paper. Sheriff Vance sent me from Copper Ridge, he said, his gaze sweeping over the property. Said you might have seen some movement east of the gulch last month. Cavalry patrols spooked a few settlers. They want reports. Jed took the paper, looked it over. It checked out. Stamped official. Name signed Silas, deputy. You live out here alone? The man asked, looking around, a curious glint in his eyes. Kind of country to go quiet in. Quiet suits me, Jed, replied, his voice flat. The man looked past him, squinting. Thought I saw a movement by the coop. Jed shifted slightly, his body subtly shielding my hiding place. Chickens. They get curious. The man didn't push, just tipped his hat. Well, if you see anything strange, uniforms, riders, Apache bands, send word. Sheriff's got scouts running up from Flagstaff. Jed gave a single nod. The man climbed back on his mule, rode off slow. Once he was gone, I wheeled myself out again, my heart still thrumming. That going to be a problem? I asked, my voice low. Not today, Jed said, his face unreadable. I rolled closer, my voice low, urgent. He saw something. He'll send someone worse. Jed set his jaw, set his eyes sharp. I didn't argue, but my jaw was set, my eyes sharp. That night I stayed up later than usual, my hands busy braiding thin strips of leather. At first Jed thought it was a nervous habit. Then he realized I was making something. A sling for a knife that could tie to my chest, a weapon I could reach easily. You think I can't defend myself, I said, when he noticed a challenge in my voice. I think you shouldn't have to, he replied, his gaze meeting mine. But I might. He didn't argue. 2 days later we kissed again. This time not out of his comfort but his choice. It happened after dinner. Jed was clearing the table. I rolled close behind him, tugged gently at his arm. He turned. I looked up steady and pulled him down by the collar. My lips met his warm, firm, a silent declaration. When we broke apart, my forehead rested against his. You don't need to fix me, I said, softly, my voice filled with a quiet certainty. I'm not trying to, he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. That night we made love again, but slower, different than before. Not out of need, not out of urgency. It was quiet, steady, a profound act of connection. I guided his hands where the nerve still worked, where I could feel his touch. He undressed me like he'd done it a dozen times, his movements gentle, reverent. I let him see all of me, the scars, the missing flesh, the curve of my breasts, the way my skin dipped uneven from the healing. I straddled him as best I could, pressing my weight into him, and his hands held my waist like I wasn't missing a thing, like I was whole. Because I was. We didn't speak through most of it. Only when I gasped against his mouth did he whisper, "You're mine now." And I said without shame, "I've been yours since you lifted me out of that dirt." We fell asleep with my hand on his chest, his fingers laced through mine. And this time there was no fear left between us. Only fire, only choice, only the promise of one more morning together. The fourth morning after the soldiers left, I was up before Jed. I sat at the edge of the porch, wrapped in the thick woven blanket I kept over my lap, sunlight glinting off the beads around my neck. The valley below was still not lifeless, but quiet in a way I now trusted. The coop was calm. The cattle stood like statues near the fence line. A single hawk circled above the ridge. No riders, no dust trails, just peace. Inside, Jed stirred from bed. He stepped out, barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, hair mussed from sleep. I turned slightly as he lowered himself beside me on the porch, step our knees touching. "You heard anything?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head. Nothing but wind. He looked at me, then really looked. The sun caught my face just right. The scar across my cheek had lightened. My hair, still thick and black, was tied back with a strip of hide. My eyes were steady. No fear there anymore. "They're not coming," I said, a quiet certainty in my voice. Jed didn't answer, but he knew I was right. The search had passed us by. Either Sheriff Vance gave up or the trail had grown cold. Either way, no one had come in 3 days. No riders, no messages, no noise. We had outlasted it. I reached for his hand, our fingers locked, slow, casual, natural. That afternoon, Jed took me out past the North Ridge. First time we'd left the ranch together. He hitched the wagon to brisk and laid a thick bed of blankets in the back. I crawled up with effort, my arms braced, my face flush from the strain, but I made it. He helped me sit upright, didn't rush, just waited. We rode in silence, sun on our backs, the wagon creaking as it crossed the dusty hills. When we reached the small creek bed, Jed stopped the horse and climbed down, helped me out, carried me to a patch of grass under a crooked cottonwood. "I used to come here with my daughter," he said, his voice low, tinged with a familiar sadness. I nodded. "You never told me her name." "Clara," he said, his gaze distant. "She liked to watch the frogs. Never caught one." I smiled, a genuine soft smile. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "You would have scared her," he muttered, smirking slightly, a rare display of humor. "Only a little," I said, a playful glint in my eyes. We sat there a long time. He leaned against the tree. I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice quiet, "about the next part." He turned slightly. "What next part?" "This isn't just surviving anymore. Not for me." Jed said nothing, letting me speak, his attention unwavering. "I want to be more than safe," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I want to build something with you. Real." I looked at him hard, my gaze certain. "You ever think about starting again?" His voice was rough when he answered, thick with emotion. "Every day since I met you." I pulled a small leather pouch from my belt. Inside it, a carved bone ring. Not perfect, its edges uneven, but strong, resilient. I'd made it 2 nights ago while he slept a silent act of commitment. I held it out to him. You took me in when I was nothing but blood and bone. No legs, no name left. You stayed. That's more than most men would do for a wife. Jed took the ring, stared at it for a long second, then slipped it onto his finger. Then I guess I'm your husband now, he said, his voice a low rumble. You always were, I replied, my heart swelling with a love I never thought I'd feel again. We returned before sunset. That evening I made cornbread. My first time cooking start to finish. I burned the edge, cursed in Apache, and nearly tossed the pan in frustration. But Jed ate every bite with a straight face, his eyes twinkling. Said it was the best damn bread he ever had. I saw right through him, but I smiled anyway, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the stove. Later, Jed lifted me into the cot, same as always, but this time I pulled him down beside me before he could step away. You're not sleeping on that chair again, I said, a playful challenge in my voice. We lay together, blankets tangled his arm beneath my neck, my fingers tracing the curve of his chest. Do you miss the old life? I asked, my voice soft. No, he said, his voice firm. Not even before the war. Only thing I miss is things I never had. I looked up at him, my heart aching with understanding. Like what? He met my eyes, his gaze filled with a profound tenderness. Like this. My lips brushed his shoulder. It's yours now. In the morning the ranch was still there. The wind blew easy. The chicken scratched in the dirt. The world hadn't ended. And for the first time in either of our lives, we woke up knowing we weren't alone and never would be again. The story of Alara and Jed reminds us that compassion and patience can heal even the most wounded souls. No matter how broken, abandoned, or burdened by the past we may be, hope and love can still be found in another's quiet kindness. Sometimes a small porch and a hand extended at the right moment can become the beginning of a whole new life. At any age, empathy and the courage to choose love remain the greatest gifts we can give and receive. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.